If you've been wondering how to adopt this technology in your business, you're not alone.
We've just gotten to a place with enabling those personas is a little bit easier.
It has to be a partnership.
What are business objectives? What is the business trying to achieve with technology in the first place?
It's not just about what the user wants.
You do have to tune those models to make sure that you're putting the right things in front of people, in front of the right people.
This isn't a small change. This is a fundamental business model change with implications to process, to people in microscopic ways. Hello, everyone, and welcome to TechCentric, your one-stop shop for understanding how tech and your business relate. I'm your host, Kris Moniz, and today we have Kris Britton, an experienced change management practitioner focused on technology adoption, Colin McGee, a human-centered design strategist, and Jodie Fortine, an experienced business strategist and AI governance architect. So if you've been with us in the last couple of episodes, you'll know we discussed sort of the foundational implications of big data over the last 2 decades and how it's sort of led to today's modern data architectures and the resulting evolution you've seen in AI that has been enabled by that foundational creation of just massive amounts of data, both structured and unstructured. All of this has kind of led to an obvious next discussion of, okay, I know what all that stuff is now and I have that stuff. How do I put it to work for my business successfully? And with that in mind, today we're going to talk about the importance of leveraging modern technology and generative AI to enhance the way you do business and to change the way your business interacts both internally and externally with various users. If you've been wondering how to adopt this technology in your business, you're not alone. It's the hot topic of the day these days. But before we get started, we should probably start with a basic scenario. So, Colin, I'm going to start with you, sir. I want to integrate generative AI into my systems. What questions should I be asking myself before I get started?
Honestly, I think the first thing you need to do is understand how your experiences are orchestrated and whether those experiences are orchestrated correctly. So the idea of, are we designing the right things for our customers? Are we sure who our customers actually are? In the world of big data, there are tons of technologies that allow us to get to personas and segments and archetypes by analyzing data. You can also go old school, traditional methods still apply, do primary research, understand how to design those things and build experiences around those definitions. Qualifying them based on value is still critical. All those things still happen. We've just gotten to a place with technologies like Microsoft CE and Salesforce that enabling those personas is a little bit easier than the manual processes that they were before. But once you have them kind of curated in terms of who they are, now you got to figure out what do they need. That's still primary research. That's still going out asking the questions to your customers. Customers can be anybody, could be partner, vendor, employee even, right? We don't really segregate it to just an end user customer on the outside. It's any of those audiences really. They all have needs. So if you combine who they are with what they need, you can start to stitch together what that orchestration layer is, and then figure out, okay, how do I satisfy and facilitate the experiences with our technologies? The world has gotten a lot better at being able to enable business users to turn those technologies on. When you think of low code, no code solutions that are built into all the digital experience platforms, that are built into a lot of the customer data platforms that are out there, so we can turn things on and turn them off very quickly. You still have to have the skills to do that. You still have to have the right mindsets in place to do that. But it all starts with that layer of orchestration that you really need to understand how to do it, what they want you to do, before you just kind of start throwing stuff against the wall and seeing what sticks. That's just not going to fly.
Got it. And that last line there of throwing things against the wall and seeing what sticks, I can imagine that being a little dangerous in today's world of modern AI. How are you thinking in terms of, I need to get specific capabilities out there and sort of defining what a successful experience looks like for a specific customer?
Yeah, that orchestration layer needs to be broken down into unique interactions, so you know what value those unique interactions are, the ones that add value for you, the ones that add value for the customer or the end user or whatever constituent you're designing something for. And understanding, hey, this is where we could apply some of the more modern technologies, AI included, is important. There are plenty of organizations for years who have tried the idea of digital personalization and have failed miserably because it's rules-based. Now that we have machines doing a lot of this on the back end where they're telling you, hey, I'm going to automate this, that gets a little bit even scarier for organizations, frankly. You do have to tune those models to make sure that you're putting the right things in front of people, in front of the right people. So that relevant architecture to understand, hey, do we have the right data? Do we have the right things in place to make sure we're delivering the right experiences? Has to be tested first. It can't just be something you throw out there. It takes time. But once it's orchestrated in a way that you understand where those interactions are and which ones are important, you can turn things on and off pretty quickly. Where it gets a little complicated is now you got to govern those things. It's not just a turn it on thing and turn it off thing. You have to make sure that you're paying attention to it over time. It's a living, breathing thing where new data is coming into that world every day, and you can't just set it and forget it. You've got to now nurture it and make sure that it's continuously adding value in both directions, you and your customer. So it's not just about getting it up and getting it live. It's also now maintaining it, nurturing it, and making sure that it's actually doing what it needs to do at all times, not just from the get-go.
So, you mentioned governing it there, so probably a natural question could go to you, Jodie. As Colin's thinking about how I need to design this thing and the different audiences I'm going after and the capabilities I want to put out there for them, how does AI governance want to think about sort of a walled garden approach, really? In other words, how do I make sure I restrict appropriately what it can do, so there's very clearly things that it can't?
Colin mentioned really looking at the interaction model and what those interaction points are. And as we're going and we're looking at implementing some of these governance or this guiding framework along the way, it has to be a partnership alongside as you're designing for the user, whether that user or the persona, no matter the persona. You have to be thinking of all of those stakeholders at once to make sure that you're looking at each of those interaction points, looking at the user, taking into consideration what potential harms could actually result as at any endpoint along the way, considering those, and then designing for those. When we're talking about experience design, it's not just about what the user wants. We're talking about designing for transparency, designing for privacy interests, designing for fairness. All of that factors in at those interaction points that Colin mentioned in order to make sure that we're containing, but yet allowing the user to realize the value. Even embedded when we're talking about a user, right? We're talking about useful. Is this even useful? We talk about use cases. It has to be something that is delivering value, that the user finds useful. And when it starts to lean towards causing harm or no longer being useful, then that's where you want to make sure that those guardrails are more solidified. And as Colin said, this is not something that you just kind of put it out there, throw it out over the wall or whatever. It's something that you're monitoring continuously along the way, making sure that you're staying within those, what it's designed to do, what that system is designed to do.
It's interesting. As I'm hearing the both of you talk about this, two diverging thoughts are coming to mind. The first is really more for you, Kris, around a lot of this sounds like the concepts around adoption are going to be key, right? Your ability to measure day-to-day utilization and is it being successfully adopted by the intended personas is huge, and how we get there is a point of contention. But also, how do you make sure you're monitoring day-to-day? If again, I'm the CEO of a $1 billion company and I want to integrate generative AI into core systems that my clients use every day. What should I be asking the folks on my team that are trying to implement that? What should they be showing me that lets me know that, not only do we get exactly everything you just described, we have a strategy for making sure that we're monitoring on a daily basis, that we're keeping track of all these different types of interaction points and whether they're positive outcomes or negative outcomes and adjusting the model accordingly. So I know I've got vigilant people who know how to watch this stuff. So I guess
Yeah,
let's answer the second question first, and we'll answer the first question second. How's that?
it's it's an important question because businesses are spending a lot of money on their technology, and they want to make sure that they're getting ROI from it. So from an OCM perspective and adoption perspective, very early on in an initiative like that, we want to understand what are business objectives? What is the business trying to achieve with technology in the first place? What kind of business outcomes are they expecting? And when we talk about the design phase, it's really important for OCM to come in very early in a project, because during the design phase, we're working with the business to understand what is the vision, what are the business objectives, what do they expect to achieve with this new technology within 90 days, a year, 2 years. And from that's when we start developing KPIs to measure once technology is implemented. And KPIs come in all different levels, right? It's number one, understanding, are employees using a system the way that is expected? Are they using it correctly? Are they following new ways of working and following processes that are expected in the new world? And then even at a business level, once implementation has taken place, what goals is a business expecting with this new technology? And we can also start monitoring at business levels what kind of business outcomes they're receiving, because then we can start monitoring at a system level, a process level, operational level. And when they're not getting or achieving the types of outcomes that they were expecting in the first place, we can really then dig in and understand why isn't an employee using the system the way that we were expecting? Was there a training issue? Maybe we didn't get some communications out. Maybe there was a process solution that just isn't working right. So it's really important to track and monitor KPIs at several different levels after any kind of system or technology implementation, to make sure that a business is getting the outcomes that they're needing.
Kris, I would add, you're actually tracking the operating model at that point. Especially the more AI that's out there, you're essentially tracking the operating model. You're trying to look and analyze the customer's experience, the internal operations, the use of technology, the data, and the profitability, right? Because all those things have to create value for each other. It's not one or the other; it's all of that. So the analytics come critical, because just because a customer may like it, it may actually be decreasing value to us. That may not be what we want. So that rubber band effect of all those things is really critical.
Yeah,
And
totally agree.
and I might add, from a governance standpoint, there are that whole continuum, like across the operating model, across the value stream, there's accountability everywhere. When we're talking about governance, when we're talking about putting in those guardrails, measuring, watching, observing, that accountability doesn't just lie with the developer. It doesn't just lie with the user. It lies at every various points, from the data collection, the storage, to the inputs that are coming in, right? The outputs going out. What's happening? How are we measuring? What are we doing? How are we monitoring? And everyone has a responsibility to watch that and to determine, okay, yeah, we're on track.
So it occurs to me, when I think of the way your three competencies come together and how you're describing them, I hadn't thought of it this way before, but if again, trying to put myself in the chair of a CEO, a CIO, a CFO, with this particular style of technology, especially this generative AI style of technology, that the big thing these days seems to be generative AI driven agents that can be more than just text now. They can be text and voice. They can be imagery. You can practically build a custom digital persona that then represents your company. So do you almost have to think of, from a customer experience perspective and a governance and an adoption perspective, of that capability that you're trying to create as a whole new employee persona in your organization, that you have to think about, well, how would I govern what I would allow that employee to do if it was a real person in my operating model? I have to do all those self-same things, only with far more rigor because they're not a physical person that I can sort of monitor the work they're doing at human speeds, because they can interact with a massive multiplier more people at once than an average human can. So I need to build this into a more automated framework of how am I putting guardrails around this very powerful being that I am creating within my organization. Is that a reasonable way to think of it?
It kind of brings to mind for me, Kris, like some of the agent building solutions that we're putting out there. And it often comes down to whose interests, when you're talking about governing and putting those guardrails, whose interests are you embedding in that persona? And asking yourself that question, are you wanting to put the organization's interests into that persona? And what does that mean? If you're wanting to put an individual employee's interests into that persona, what does it mean? And when is there a point where we want to be thinking about putting society's interests into that persona to make sure that we're meeting the needs of as many of many interests, right? As many stakeholders as possible. Because when we're building these models, when we're building a persona or an agent, for example, out there, we have to be thinking of the different stakeholders. So, for example, if you were going to build a life insurance, an automatic, a way to determine your life insurance, there's the user that's applying for the life insurance. There's the developer, their interests. There's the organization that's offering the life insurance. There's the training data that goes into the life insurance that was built by other individuals. So there's so many different interests in mind. That's the decision that needs to be made first in building out and governing kind of what's going to happen and protecting your organization and society at large from harm.
I think there's also two forms of this generation, the Gen AI, that we need to be careful with or pay attention to. There's the implicit and the explicit. So the explicit, conversational UI, where it's prompt driven, versus implicit, where behind the scenes, the data is going to tell something to do something else, right? The one is out of the user's control. It's using behavioral data in the digital world to promote content or to promote an experience without them actually prompting anything, purely by behavioral data, either at mass or individually, doesn't matter. That's how this web world is going to work in the near future, versus a conversational UI like ChatGPT, where you're prompt driven, right? You're asking it something or looking for something. Those are very different worlds, right? And one is empowering and the other is the user is actually a bystander to a degree. And that's the dangerous part that I think we have to be careful of, is where it is not prompt driven. That introduces much more risk, because you have to be well versed in your behavioral data to understand what the possible outcomes are before you start just throwing stuff out there, because that can get very dangerous very quickly.
There is a concept I've been reading up on for, as I believe you put it, so explicit AI is more in that example of life insurance you gave, Jodie, it's the underwriting model, right? That takes in tons of data points, and you may not even know as the applicant what those data points are, and it makes a decision. And you, as the person applying, really have no insight into how it came to that decision, whether that decision is justified or not. And there's this concept, if you're very interested in creating ethical AI, that one of your rights, and I believe in Europe you actually have this right, is the right to an explanation. So if a piece of AI said, no, we're not going to offer you that loan, and you go, well, that doesn't make any sense. Why? If you have that right, then the organization who wrote that AI has to be able to give you some kind of an explanation about why that happened. But the theory around it becomes, well, what kind of an answer do you want? Do you want a numbers and algorithmic answer that you're probably not going to understand? Or especially if maybe you can't give that answer, right? If it's a very complex model and it's kind of a black box, the person who communicated the answer to you may not know. So one of the strategies is you build a second AI intended to approximate what the other AI does and have its purpose being to explain in English the outcome and its decision. So basically, you build an AI to explain another AI. And is that a concept we may have to start thinking of when it comes to these generative AI tools in terms of, do we need to start thinking about, if we're building these personas to deal with our clients, that and the perspective of that persona is extremely complex? Do we need to build paired out AIs that sort of monitor that interaction and evaluate that response and go, was that AI in the best interest of my company? And if it wasn't, flag it. That doesn't mean it's wrong. It just means if I'm going to build a new employee effectively, I have to build a manager for that employee as well. Is that reasonable?
Purely from an OCM perspective, what you're talking about is something that I think could go a long way in terms of helping companies and employees develop trust in these applications and systems. And adoption is so important. And whatever way any employee is going to be experiencing AI with systems, bottom line is that employees need to develop trust in order to adopt. And AI is so new and it's so complex, and I could definitely see how there may be a need and some companies that would feel comfortable in something that like what you described, to help their employees develop trust as they learn more and get used to systems with AI.
I also think the younger generations are a why culture. They're going to go why every time you give them an answer, because they want deeper answers and they want explanation. So we kind of have to go with what their expectations are. Employees, customers, doesn't matter. They all live in this why world that they operate in. And college football coaches have learned this. The younger generation, how they have to coach them is completely different. Well, they're moving with society, and that's what the Gen AI tools have to do as well. That's what the operations have to do. To your point, Kris, if you're going to have a pseudo new persona, you need a pseudo new manager. And there's a whole bunch of things that go along with that to ensure we answer enough of those whys to make people comfortable.
And this even brings us, full circle back to what we were talking about early on, where we're not working separately. We all need to be working together, building, the experience designer, the change manager, the governance team. It is a diverse, cross-functional team that's working together to make sure that we're addressing all of these different variables, that we're designing the way we can. We're going to design for explainability. Some of these models get so complex that, yes, it becomes a black box, and it becomes very difficult to explain. But if we know going in, when we're building and developing these models, that we want to design for explainability, we want to design for transparency, and that user interface can also be built to enable that better, either through this persona or through some other interface or interaction model.
It sounds like a very exciting, and I dare say slightly nerve-wracking time if you're running a company and realizing you're kind of out of choices. You've got to look towards adopting stuff like this because your competitors are. And if you don't, how soon before you're at a disadvantage? But part of when we were planning out this episode, one of the conversations that came up was how many companies have been in the news already, having run afoul of just improper use and deployment of this type of technology. And the technology is barely 2 years old. I mean, ChatGPT hit the scene, what was it, February of last year, something like that? Not a long time. And everything from, that incident with Air Canada to, I saw one the other day about a law firm that got sanctioned, and the lawyers almost got disbarred because they used ChatGPT to do research for a case and didn't bother validating the data ChatGPT gave them, and it ended up all of the cases it cited were made up.
Well, that's an interesting point, because the world is going to change.
Yeah.
The idea of contracts, for instance, right? One of the Gen AI tools that's out there or capabilities is RAG, right? Retrieval Augmented Generation. That should make things like creating contracts that are more accurate, quicker, faster, so companies can get things signed, start generating revenue. What that really does is change legal and compliance organizations dramatically, because that's probably 90% of what they do within financial services is deal with the contracts, especially on the commercial side of banking. So when you think of RAG as a technology, you're like, great, it's going to be awesome. It's going to induce all this speed and accuracy. And then the compliance people are like, yeah, but now you're putting me out of a job. No, we have to reutilize you in different ways. That's the key. We're not using this to replace humans. We're not looking at capital reductions. We're looking at efficiencies. We're looking at driving profitability when you use them internally like that. That RAG side of Gen AI, I think, is going to be a big wave of things when you talk about document creation, that people just have to learn to use it the right way, but not deflect it. And my fear is compliance and legal teams start to deflect those things, and they're so inaccurate. They're so inaccurate. I don't know if they're that inaccurate at times. Your case, Kris, it was inaccurate. This one, if you use it the right way, shouldn't be as inaccurate. Should make your job easier.
And that's it. Oh, sorry, that's it. You got to use it the right way. We already know and are aware that ChatGPT, not to pick on ChatGPT, we don't want to. I'm not trying to pick on him or her.
No,
I think mine's name is Mabel. But anyway, I don't want to pick on them. But it is a people pleaser. It wants to give you what you want. It wants to give you those answers, and then that puts you at that risk for hallucinations, as we all know, or false information, made up content. And that just reinforces that need for, there is a human in the loop component. We cannot disregard that. We have to make sure that as we're building out these models, as we're using these tools, this is not to displace the human role. The human creativity, the human expertise, the human's ability to have inference and critical thinking. All of those skills and values are so essential as we use these tools going forward. And the legal team, they forgot about the human in the loop. They were like, oh wow, that was easy. I'm going to do this more often. And they learned. And we will continue to learn. We will. This is evolving fast. There's a lot of uncertainty. You could say that use follows invention, or whatever that term is out there. I think I'm using it right, in the sense that we put it out there, and in some cases we don't know all of the different behaviors and how individuals are going to use or behave as they're interacting with these tools and these models, and how much value it's going to deliver. And we have to use those guardrails to keep us safe and to keep us from veering off track, and to know when, oh wait, we're leaning. It doesn't mean that we have to fail, right? We're smart enough to know that, hey, there's a pattern here where we might be going off track, but it requires that human in the loop. It requires us to keep that human-centered mindset.
Yeah, when we talk about the design phase on this, you all touched on this, but this is not to displace humans. And it's really important from the people perspective that early on in design phase, that we're truly understanding those impacts to employee roles, so that we can help organizations with figuring out what are those new things, upskilling, that we're going to have to, plan for people, because, maybe technology is handling a lot of the, more mundane things that employees and humans are doing right now. And, there are probably upskilling long-term plans that need to take place for how a company is going to utilize and leverage employees in a different way, not to replace them, but employees will be doing different things and working in different ways and making decisions in different manners. And so it's really important, even, from the very beginning, to help organizations understand how are they going to help move employees, through this journey as we're all learning how AI is handling some of these tasks.
I like that, because in the example of the lawyer, his failure at that point, what they figured out later was, he didn't validate what ChatGPT told him. So again, he took the human out of the middle, as you just said, big no-no. But B, how he asked the question. Because he didn't ask the question of, please catalog for me 3 or 5 existing cases that prove the following case law. He said, please describe to me 5 cases that prove the following case law. So it made up 5 cases that proved the following case law. He just didn't ask the question the right way. And that goes to your point. Like, you have to train people how to use these things. They are very powerful tools. You know, you're giving everybody on your team their own little nuclear bomb. And I don't mean that to sound as scary as I just did, so probably should think of a different term, but you're giving them a very powerful tool. And in terms of how we think of that concept of you're building a superpowered employee, but that superpowered employee has no moral compass, no value base. All it has is what it's learned from the data that you've shared. So the second you remove the human in the middle, it is going to just go and do whatever the data tells it, and there's going to be no judgment applied. There's no concept of consequences in its decision. It's just not what you're building.
Not in Gen AI. In other versions of AI that are much more extreme, that emotional intelligence is supposed to exist. But those things in technology don't exist quite yet, not where they're, at a commercial level, right? But you're right. In the Gen AI world, it's responsive. It's the input that kind of drives the output.
It's certainly not AGI, artificial general intelligence, which I don't know if I want that to be figured out in my lifetime or not. I'm still on the fence about that. But it is certainly very powerful. There's this concept of an individual, they evolve into a different being when you combine tools with humans, right? So if you go backwards in time far enough and you go into the creation of a hammer, if you give a hammer to a human being, slowly that tool over time and usage integrates itself into their personal identity and their personal capability, right? There was a study done that, for example, if you wear a massive hat with a huge feather or whatever on top of it, over time of wearing it, you slowly incorporate it just mentally, unconsciously into your physical hitbox, where it's, okay, now my body ends here instead of here. And I'm very curious as to how AI, generative AI, as we use this as a new tool that we hand to our teams, how this changes how they see and interact, not with the world, but with our business, with our customers. And how do we monitor that as a series of competencies to start to understand, I think you may have said it earlier, Jodie, we're going to learn. We don't have to fail, but we are going to learn, and we need to figure out, as you put it, what exactly is the actual use really going to become as we put it out there, and what is the most common adoption pattern going to end up looking like, and how does that inform how we allow what we're building to evolve. I think that was really what we wanted to cover in this episode. Unless, of course, I missed something. Was there a question I should have asked?
I think we all could talk about this all day long, Kris. Honestly, I think, I mean, certainly this is, we're living and breathing it all the time. Our clients are coming to us and they're living and breathing it. They want to learn, how can we, adopt, integrate, leverage this tool in a way that makes a difference and that our organizations are ready for. So it's exciting times. It's fun. It really is. I mean, I'm using different tools every day, depending on what I'm trying to accomplish. I don't know that we could talk about it for hours. Again, Kris, we could talk about it for hours.
I told my team, if you're gonna use any sort of Gen AI to create content that's gonna go somewhere, I need to see it first as a spec and check. I looked at 40 pages of content today around design stimulation that's going to end up in a company's design system to tell them how to do design for manufacturer. I couldn't trust that out of the box. I need to look at it. And sure enough, there were plenty of changes that had to be made to make it more relevant, more tailored to the customer, but it saved 2.5 weeks worth of time.
Yeah.
So
I'm curious, Colin, did you have any aha moments? Like, was there anything like, that
there was
edit?
the editing I knew was going to happen. I think the aha was the sheer amount of stuff I wasn't even thinking about to add to this catalog of how-to articles, essentially, to teach organizations that don't have designers how to design, because they just code to code with developers and there's no sense of usability whatsoever. So instead of having them hire a bunch of designers, they want a guide and a framework. Okay, we're using this system to do that. The sheer amount of content that came out of that, the 40 pages, is what shocked me. That was the aha, was a lot of things I wasn't even thinking about. And I've led a design team here for however long. So it was eye-opening.
Well, I mean, full circle back to what Kris said, right? It's like when you were talking, Kris, earlier, I kind of heard this guy, the centaur and the cyborg, and it's like, okay, how are we using these tools? In some cases, it's a cyborg. In some cases, it's a centaur. But in either case, the human is still there, reviewing, and it is kind of this combined partnership, and that's really, really exciting.
Awesome. Well, I hope that folks watching are walking away going, okay, I've got a lot of questions I need to ask my team and make sure they're thinking of the right stuff. Because what I heard in this conversation today is, I work for a not insignificantly small company, and we have modernization of our own that we have to do. And what I'm hearing here is, if I truly want to wire this new generation of AI into the way I do business, this isn't a small change. This is a fundamental business model change with implications to process, to people, to technology, but not in general, in microscopic ways. In the ways I will be doing business tomorrow, I haven't thought of yet. And I'm not going to think of them until I start altering my perspective by using these tools and learning, sometimes easily, sometimes difficultly. That's the point. That's why we have technology, and that's why we have this show. So,
and that's why we have governance also, to keep us safe.
Well, I do want to say thank you to my guests for spending some time with us here today to chat about this. If you've come this far in the episode, you are obviously considering modernizing your business, but probably with AI integration. And if you're interested in learning more about the journey of modernization from start to finish, please be sure to join us in the next few episodes that we're going to be doing. We're going to cover end-to-end, current day modernization of business, everything from process to adoption to technology implications, business architectures, enterprise architectures, you name it, and concluding with a whole series of real-world client use cases to help you kind of see your business in modernization. If you want to keep the conversation going or suggest an idea for a future episode, please comment below. And as always, if you have a question for me or one of our guests, you can contact us directly via the contact information in the description below. Thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you in the next one.